By shutting down the government, what they're doing is giving the Trump administration more authority. You don't have funding for these programs. And so the administration has to make determinations based on who's essential, who's not. They know this is wrong. They know this isn't the right thing to do. This is just an example of political nonsense, and the only people hurt by it are the American people.
Welcome back to The Brief, Insights from the Inside. We are joined today by Congressman Mike Lawler. Congressman Lawler represents New York's 17th Congressional District, and he is consistently ranked as one of the most effective and bipartisan members of Congress. Congressman Lawler, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I want to contextualize the conversation as follows. Our audience skewers on the younger side, and when they look at the political process, all they see essentially is dysfunction. So why is it, in the most rudimentary way I can articulate, that the government is shut down? And what is it we need to do to reopen the government?
Well, this is the Schumer shutdown. It is entirely based on Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries being petrified of their far-left base and wanting to show them that they are fighting back against President Trump. There is absolutely zero reason to shut down the government, especially when a clean CR had passed the House. House Republicans passed it 3 weeks ago to keep the government funded and open through November 21st. Democrats in the Senate have blocked it. You need 60 votes in the Senate to pass a continuing resolution for government funding, and they have chosen to block it. They're claiming it's about health care. And as I pointed out to Leader Jeffries earlier this week, there's a bill that is out there to extend the government subsidies for the Affordable Care Act by 1 year. And I and a number of my colleagues have signed on to it. And he could easily join us in that effort if he's serious about trying to address the short-term concern of healthcare spiking, premium spiking. But he refused. So this is the impasse that we're in right now. Democrats just refusing to open the government up and demanding ransom, basically, as part of these deliberations.
So you mentioned this confrontation you had with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. You had another confrontation together with House Speaker Mike Johnson with the senators from Arizona. I guess, number one, what were you actually hoping to get from that confrontation? And then also, broadly speaking, what are the political concessions you're hoping to get from the Democratic Party to reopen the government?
Yeah, so I had filmed a video outside the Senate chamber, pointing out Chuck Schumer is the reason that the government was shut down. And as I was walking back past the Speaker's office, there was a gaggle of reporters waiting for Ruben Gallego and Mark Kelly to come do a press conference outside the Speaker's office. And so I stood on the side and listened to them. And ultimately, the Speaker came out and started engaging with them and answering their absurd accusations that they were hurling at him. Finally, I just had enough and jumped in to support the Speaker because it was ridiculous, and pointed out that, in fact, Mark Kelly and Ruben Gallego voted to shut the government down 7 times, and called them out to their face and told them, get back down the hallway and go vote to open up the government if you want to open the government. And then, of course, obviously the exchange with Leader Jeffries, he's been lying to the American people for weeks. The fact is that when Joe Biden was president, Democrats voted 13 times to keep the government open, passing clean CRs. Regardless of who is president, I've always been consistent in this. Shutting down the government is stupid. I voted 8 times when Joe Biden was president to keep the government open and funded. I've done the same under President Trump. And so I called Leader Jeffries out to his face. Last week he wanted to act all tough and said, if you have something to say it to my face. So I went and said it to his face, and he didn't exactly like that. He had a little bit of a meltdown, started yelling, screaming, stammering, stuttering, couldn't answer a single question. And all he kept saying was, you're embarrassing yourself and your boss Trump. I mean, that was his argument in this exchange, and it was just foolish. I mean, he really does not hold a candle to Nancy Pelosi.
So you just mentioned it was the Democrats who voted to shut down the government. But if I'm an outside observer, I'll say, hang on a second. Republicans control the House. Republicans control the Senate. Republicans control the White House. Is this not a Republican shutdown?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because Democrats have been trying to throw this out there and try to confuse people. The fact is that you need 60 votes in the Senate, and Republicans have 53 senators, which means at minimum you would need 7 Democrats, depending on how a Republican may vote. Rand Paul has been voting with the Democrats, so you would need 8. But the fact is that it requires 60 votes in the Senate to pass anything other than reconciliation or for a nomination for a political appointee. But to end debate, it requires 60 votes. And so that's just a reality that we have to deal with. I don't want to eliminate the filibuster. I think there's an important reason for it. And I also think when you're in the minority, you want the protection of the filibuster so that you can build consensus. What the Democrats are doing here is simply trying to hold the American people hostage in exchange for 1.5 billion or trillion in new spending, and that is just unconscionable. It's not something that any of us are going to support or tolerate, and so we're at an impasse here. But that's the bottom line: is you need 60 votes in the Senate, and that's why Democrats are using this as leverage to try and extort a grab bag of goodies as part of this.
From my vantage point, it sort of seems like this government shutdown is kind of different than every other government shutdown in the sense that you now have a White House, especially the head of the OMB, saying, well, don't tempt us with a good time. As in, if you're going to furlough federal workers, we think there's a lot of wastewater abuse within the federal government anyway. So if the Democrats insist on shutting down the government, then we may not have a lot of these civil servants come back to work at all. So do you actually think that the Democratic plan to shut down the government might actually backfire and that the Trump administration will say, well, okay, we want to reduce the size and scope of the federal government anyway? So is this sort of short-sighted, you think?
Oh, I think it's very short-sighted. And, at a time when they claim, the Trump administration is abusing executive authority and overstepping its bounds and violating the Constitution, by shutting down the government, what they're doing is giving the Trump administration more authority. You don't have funding for these programs. You don't have funding for the workforce. You don't have funding for the government. And so the administration has to make determinations based on who's essential, who's not, what programs are vital, what programs aren't. And it just creates a level of uncertainty and unnecessary chaos. And this is all driven by the fact that the Democrats are trying to appease their far left base. So from my vantage point, there's a very easy way to solve this whole thing. Open the government up. Vote to pass the clean CR, and then we don't have this debate and discussion.
I think that's a really important point. And full disclosure, I was on the far left of the political spectrum my entire young adulthood. Nobody's perfect. But I do remember Chuck Schumer routinely stating that one of the worst options politically would be to shut down the government. And he and his party would do everything they could to keep the government open.
It's a politics of idiocy, of confrontation, of paralysis. Shutting down government over a policy difference is self-defeating. We can never hold American workers hostage again. While the CR bill is very bad, the potential for a shutdown has consequences for America that are much, much worse.
So I'm wondering from a political perspective, how much of the shutdown is brought about the fact that the mainstream Democratic leadership, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, they're actually scared of their far left base. Of course, it was Chuck Schumer who just last March negotiated with Republicans to keep the government open, and he was hammered by his own party. So how much of this is actually just politics and the Democratic Party trying to find their political identity?
It's entirely driven by it. AOC is threatening to primary Schumer. There's a city council member in Brooklyn threatening to primary Jeffries. And so they are betwixt and between. They know this is wrong. They know this isn't the right thing to do. They're on record multiple times lecturing America, lecturing Republicans about keeping the government open and funded, passing clean CRs. You don't pound your fist on the table demanding policy changes and holding the American people hostage. Yet that's precisely what they're doing. And Chuck Schumer had the audacity this week to say, every day we're winning. I mean, what? It's insane. They're more focused on the politics of this than they are the American people. They could care less the damage they're inflicting on our economy. GDP growth is generally impacted by government shutdowns. They don't care. They don't care. This is all about power and politics and trying to appease a far left base so they don't get primaried.
I think that's an important point because obviously it's not just civil servants who will be adversely affected, but the Small Business Administration, for example, will not be approving new loans. The Bureau of Labor Statistics will not put out a new jobs report. If you're traveling, the TSA will be a lot slower and understaffed. So how do you actually see, as someone who's consistently ranked one of those bipartisan and effective members of Congress, how do you see working with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries? How can you create legislative solutions with the Democratic Party to get the government back open?
Look, I think obviously they need to pass the Clean CR. I'm very open to working together on the Affordable Care Act subsidies. We don't want to see a premium spike. There's a larger term issue, though, which I think we have to address, which is the fact that premiums have increased by over 60% since Obamacare took effect. So it's not doing its job as Democrats promised it would in terms of affordability. But there's a lot of issues that we can work on together, from housing to permitting reform to energy and vocational schools, career and technical education. I think there's a lot more bipartisan agreement on things than people realize. And it's why I've been effective as a legislator, because I do try to actually build consensus. Last Congress, I passed 11 bills. 6 were signed into law by President Biden. All of them were substantive, serious policies from, Middle East and foreign policy to security for our presidential candidates. And these obviously, there's a lot of issues to deal with that we can address if people would stop with the politics, stop playing games, and actually get to work. You look at the issue of immigration. President Trump has secured the border. Long term, we need to have an immigration system that works, that is functional, a lawful, legal immigration system. And that is something that I think we can build consensus on. So there's a lot of work ahead. I think, this is just an example of political nonsense and trying to get leverage or power. It's really unfortunate, and the only people hurt by it are the American people.
So I have lots of friends in New York's 17th congressional district, and you are known colloquially as the SALT guy, state and local taxes. But obviously you're a Congress member first and foremost from New York, and New York City is on the verge of electing a self-avowed socialist. What do you think are the long-term consequences of New York City, America's largest city, electing someone whose policies have been tried in every other socialist and communist country to, let's just say, limited degrees of success?
Look, my wife is from Moldova, a former Soviet satellite state. She came to the United States in search of economic opportunity and a better life. She left behind, a former Soviet satellite state for a reason, and it's because of the opportunity that America offers, and especially economically. And so when you think about the prospects of an avowed socialist who talks in Marxist theory, talking about seizing the means of production, banning private property ownership. He wants to defund the police and shut down private prisons. He wants to legalize prostitution. He wants to freeze the rent and provide free busing and government-run grocery stores. When that individual is on the precipice of becoming mayor of the financial capital of the world and the largest city in America, it does not bode well for other major cities around the country. And what we saw when AOC won back in 2018, people like Zoran ran for elected office, and they started winning city council seats and state assembly seats and state senate seats. And you have this compadre of socialists elected to New York state government and New York city government, and they're growing. And so the question is how to combat this. And so, from my vantage point, this is a disaster for New York. It will lead to a mass exodus in a state that already leads the nation in outmigration. It'll be the best thing for Florida. Ron DeSantis must be celebrating because you're going to continue to see Wall Street leaving, and that's a big problem.
So it was actually George Will, the noted conservative columnist, who was saying a few nights ago on Bill Maher's show that he was actually hoping that Zohar Mamdani would win. And that's because he believes America needs a reminder every 20 or 30 years as to why we abhor socialism, why we gravitate towards capitalism, liberalism in its classic sense, and democracy. And in his view, America has become complacent and somewhat forgetful as to those ideologies. So from a political perspective, do Republicans, both in the midterms in 2026 and then the presidential election in 2028, plan on using the rise of socialism in big blue cities like New York to their political advantage?
Look, politically, it obviously, I think, will help Republicans because a lot of voters, especially those in the middle, conservative Democrats, center-right Republicans, they do not subscribe to this. They don't support this. They won't agree with these policies. And so I think, obviously, politically, it can be very helpful. But it comes on the backs of New Yorkers, and that's something that I don't want to see happen. I don't support. So while it may be advantageous politically, I think governmentally it's a disaster. And again, what happens in New York doesn't tend to stay in New York. So the challenge to me will be you will start seeing a rise in other cities around the country of socialist candidates, and that's not going to be good.
I have one last question for you, Congressman. If you look back since the reelection of President Trump, over these last 9 months or so, what areas of legislation or cultural change are you most proud of? What successes do you think are really the hallmarks of the last couple of months of this new administration?
Well, I think his most recent announcement is historic with respect to a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the hostages. I think his foreign policy has sought to, work our relationships and end these conflicts around the globe, bring about greater economic cooperation, get our allies to do more, whether it's NATO ponying up more, whether it's our Arab partners in the Middle East putting more pressure on Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. The president has really worked very hard to restore America's role in the world and establish peace through strength. And I think that is a tremendous accomplishment. Obviously, securing the border and stopping the massive influx of illegal immigration, deporting criminal aliens. The president said he would do that, and he has. And I think getting the tax bill done, earlier this year was critical, especially, for areas like mine. You mentioned salt, lifting the cap on salt from $10,000 to $40,000. 90% of my constituents will be able to fully deduct their state and local taxes. So these are big wins, and I think there's a lot more to do and a lot more issues to tackle, and I look forward to continuing to work on them.
So I lied. I said I had one last question, but I really one last question. If you look in your crystal ball, is Donald Trump getting the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, not this year, but I think in the future he should. He should, especially if this war in Gaza comes to an end, the hostages are released. We'll see what happens in Ukraine. But he has been working tirelessly to end these conflicts. And from my vantage point, if we can establish Middle East peace, not only does he deserve the Nobel Peace Prize, he will go down in history as one of the greatest foreign policy presidents ever.
Well said. Well, Congressman, we appreciate you making the time, and we'd also, more importantly, we appreciate all the work you're doing on Capitol Hill so we can get this government reopened and it can better serve the American people. Congressman Mike Lawler, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.